the relationship between our own perception of ethics and morality and the Torah definitions of ethics and morality. Okay, and the fact is that is there any value or is there any what do you call it? I guess value. Is there any worth to the perceptions we have of our own morality? Okay, if you feel that something's immoral, you feel something's unethical, does that, you just have a feeling like that? Does that have a real essential value within Torah perspective? Okay, and that will get into many different considerations, because one issue is whether the emotions have any value or not, and then there's another issue: what happens if there's a conflict between your perception of what's moral and the Torah's statement of what's moral. Okay, so we have a statement in the Sifri in Re'eh, in Parshas Re'eh, where it says V'asita tov v'yashar, and there's Malchokas Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel in the Sifri. Rabbi Shmuel, the second mandover in the Sifri, he says Hatov b'nei Adam v'yashar b'nei Shamayim, and Rabbi Akiva, which is generally the position that's mostly quoted, says Hatov b'nei Shamayim v'yashar b'nei Adam. So there's a concept that what is tov in the eyes of God, and what is yashar, what is straight in the eyes of man. So it seems to be that there's a value to what human beings perceive, and we are to consider that value. We are supposed to be perceived. We are supposed to meet a standard of being yashar b'nei Adam. So human beings should be able to evaluate us as yashar. So that already seems to imply that we're basically accepting that there's a yardstick of behavior that is essential in human beings, and we are supposed to value that yardstick. And there are various views in the throughout Torah that seems to imply that we want to be accepted in the eyes of mankind. So mankind has a certain way of evaluating things, and we want to be perceived as proper in that, by their form of evaluation. So the question is that seems to say, okay, this has some standard. So the fact is, and there's many other arguments to state that this is so. I mean, there's the idea of the world, the Yumas Olam will look at us and say, Rak am chacham v'navon, this is a wise and understanding nation, so it seems to will be perceived as wise and understanding. There's the Pirkei Avos, is Tiferet Tol Min HaAdam, there's a perception of its being a Tiferet, having some kind of a beauty in the ideas of man. So the point is there's a whole variety of perspective that says that how human beings look at you is a value that we are supposed to consider. So the point is how does that work with what is the revelation yardstick, where basically we're told what is right and wrong by HaKadosh Baruch Hu through revelation. So how do these two things connect? And really what comes out of this, and the truth is I find this question to be very powerful in our world today. In the times of the Rishonim, basically there was a general accepted perception of what was moral, even in terms of the philosophers. There was an idea of what was moral. And morality was perceived to be somewhat objective. It came out of logic, came out of the perception of rationalism, and rationalism was pretty straightforward. This is what is right and what is wrong. In our world today, we now live with a change in our moral perceptions. First of all, we have a perception of relativism, okay, and second of all, we have gone through in the last, let's say 50, 60 years, complete changes in our ethical perceptions. So the point is that the question we can ask is that if you evaluate the perceptions of human beings, those perceptions are somewhat relativistic, so what standard can they have from a Torah perspective? Because they can switch around and change. It's very interesting. I was watching today a clip on CNN.com, had a clip of a debate, quote unquote a debate, but actually it just was Christopher Hitchens, the noted atheist, was talking to his brother Peter Hitchens, who is a noted Christian, and they were talking about the role of God and so forth and so forth. And I saw a little clip of it, and it was Peter Hitchens says if there's a concept such as morality and it's all relativistic, I would say that's not a morality. In other words, if everything can change today, I feel really bad about this, and tomorrow I don't care. So what's morality? Morality must have some kind of permanence to it. Now the truth is that in many people they turn to a defense of Torah by saying that Torah obviously is not relativistic. So it gives a tremendous strength to Torah in the sense that if you believe in Torah and believe in Har Sinai, you have statements of morality that don't change. So people say this actually shows that you have a little bit more of a standard of morality. The point is that this is where you get into issues. If the Torah is saying that you're supposed to look at Yashar B'nei Adam, then if what's Yashar B'nei Adam is going to be relativistic, so it seems the Torah is giving some kind of ascension to this perception. So it's something that we have to deal with in terms of what are we looking for from B'nei Adam. Now, the first thing is to look at what exactly is morality. So some people like to argue that without God there's no perception of morality. Okay, there's a lot of people like to try to say that without God, how can it be a morality? Morality, God gives some type of
guideline.
Pardon?
A guideline towards morality.
A guideline of morality. Otherwise, it's just pick and choose from human beings. Fact is, though, is that when you introduce God into the mix, you basically have a question of what exactly is morality. See, a real fundamental question is God moral? You ask that question, is God moral? What is morality? You say a yardstick or a standard that in certain ways defines God himself. That becomes part of the question. If you say there's a concept of justice outside of God, and God did not create the concept of justice, then basically there's arguments that you're setting a parameter on God from outside. So some people say that's wrong. Some other people say, no, the fact is the same way you say that God is one, the same way you say that God doesn't have a body, the statement of justice is problems from the Roman's perspective of saying a positive attribute to God, but what it really means is this is an inherent part of the very nature of who he is. Right? It's not that God can be unjust. It's the same way if God can be unjust, it'd be the same thing as God can be physical. Well, he's God. By definition, he's not physical. Right? He can be multi-dimensional. By definition, he can't be. So there's people who look at it that way. But the question comes out is these definitions part and parcel of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, which means they have a definition outside, or basically, is morality a creation of God? In other words, the reason that we consider justice to be moral is because God has commanded justice. Okay, now that becomes the essence of that question becomes: is morality created by God, or is morality something that basically is descriptive? Okay, now where this comes from is a question of, if morality is created by God, then the Tzivui Hashem is the definition of morality. And once you have a Tzivui Hashem, you can't question. It's like when you look at the Akedah. It's very interesting when you look at the Akedah. Kierkegaard, from a non-Jewish perspective, looked at it as a conflict between God and ethics. Right? And therefore, there's a conflict between God and ethics. It shows that belief overrides ethics. God is above ethics, or whatever. Point is is that we if you look at the people who develop questions on the Akedah, the actual question of of God of Avram being told to do something immoral is not really found in the Meforshim. There's a lot of questions that Avram himself asks. He says the Medrash says Avram asked right after, he says, you told me that from Yitzchak will become my zera, and then you're telling me to kill him. So it's a steer meaning obey. But the fact is that the argument that Avram gives at Stom, he doesn't give over here. Seems to imply that inherent in this is a perception. If God says to kill Yitzchak, then inherently it must be moral. Must be moral. Now the question is it that it must be moral? The question is it moral by definition, since God commanded it is moral, or is it the fact that you have to work it out how it's moral? Okay? In other words, obviously if God says it, it must be moral, but the fact that God says it is not the definition of morality. And that's a tension that's found in the mitzvot. When you're told that something is a command, is it the right thing to do because God told you it's the right thing to do, or is it the right thing to do because it reflects this concept of morality or this consciousness? Okay? And therefore that consciousness is now going to be a factor that we have to work with. And that's something that we have to deal with a little bit. But the point is that it's the starting point of any definition of morality. Is morality from the Tzivui Hashem, or is it from a presentation beyond that? The Rav points this out. There's a new book out from manuscripts of Rabbi Shaber called the Rise of Ethical Man. And in it, he makes an interesting point. I think he sort of says Agavorcha, but he says that Adam and Chava, from the Eitz Das Tovara, their definition of not eating from the Eitz Das Tovara was simply because it was a Tzivui Hashem. The fact that God said not to eat it basically meant it was wrong to eat it. Okay, the subsequent understanding of why it's wrong, Tovara, so that comes later. So the fact is, the first definition of morality is the tzivui. Okay, it's because God says it's usher, that's what makes it immoral. So the point is that seems to be some type of theme that we're working with in terms of a yardstick of revelation. We know that the things which God said for us to do or not do, that defines morality. Why? Because God commanded it, and that's it. That's all we really have to know. Why? It's a Tzivui Hashem. And that's the way many people look at the way we look at definition. I know this is moral. Why? Because God commanded it. Then the question that comes up, so now what's all this other stuff of trying to work out moral perceptions? That's sort of like us trying to find Tamei HaMitzvahs, but the bottom definition of that definition is that it's a Tzivui Hashem. That's what defines it as right or wrong. But then, you see, Adam and Chava get into this idea of Tovara, and the fact is that there is some type of moral perception that we have, some idea of something that happens. Varn Lichtenstein, he talks about it, he says, what's the proof that we have some type of moral compass? Because you see by the Akedah, by its stone, Avram does say, Hashrevet kol haaretz liyaseh mishpat, which seems to say, God, I don't understand what you're doing because it doesn't seem to meet my understanding of justice. And Avram Avinu says I have to have some understanding of justice, and I have to understand that you are bound by justice to some extent, right? Because okay. Now the point is though that Rav Lichtenstein seems to imply that this tells us that these consciousness we have within us of these moral perceptions has value. Okay, so therefore he looks at Mishpat as an example that we do have deception of morality outside of the Tzivui Hashem.
Or is it merely that Abraham is expecting consistency in the application?
But he has a concept that he's dealing with.
It's the universality, it's the consistency,
right,
that ties that all together.
Right, but the consistency based around some type of yardstick. that we should have some understanding of how it works.
Right.
Right? The question is that yardstick something that we have within ourselves? We have a sense of what is moral.
Well, we're expecting it to be fairly applied to every individual.
Why?
Right?
Yeah, and the question is why? It seems to imply that that's some standard we have within ourselves. And that's why Rav Lichtenstein says that that's Lifnei Mishur Sedin, and he has sources to back it up, that Lifnei Mishur Sedin is that the first level is clearly the Tziva Hashem. The halacha, the first level of Tziva Hashem. But once you have the halacha, then there are concepts we are supposed to develop that take us to Lifnei Mishur Sedin, which is the application of consistency of those concepts. But it seems to be that those consistencies come from something within ourselves that drives us to that level of consistency. We have a sense of what's fair. We have a sense of what's honest.
Well, we want also simplicity, right?
If we want that, but it still ties to our own senses, right? When Avram says to Shevel Eretz Mishpat, he has an idea of what Mishpat is, and he's bothered by it. Okay, that seems to be something about this. Is that the key thing is that within us is a sense, if you want to call it emotion, or some intuition, some sense. We're not looking at just logical consistency, like it's a steer minei obey in this Gemara and that Gemara over there. On one hand you say A, and then the other hand you say B, and it seems like a stira. Right, even which you can ask in kashrus and in a lot of things where we don't necessarily have an emotional, moral feeling about, but we can say, hey, we need some consistency. But on the other hand, we have a sense where, with this one, we have an emotional response that we give value to, an ethical response to it. We feel something ethical over here. So Rav Arnold says, yes, we have it. He calls that natural morality. Basically, is we have this sense of natural morality, which implies that we have a moral sense within ourselves, and that natural morality defines is applicable Lifnei Mishur Sedin. Once you have the basic statements of halacha, where basically a statement comes from a Kodesh Baruch Hu, is the first level morality. So there's the Tzivah Hashem, and then once you have the Tzivah Hashems, you can then apply this morality and go beyond the Tzivah Hashems. Now, the fact is that there's my Rabbi had a question on this statement from Rav Lichtenstein, and I think it was a really good statement. The question is, this idea of Avram saying, "Ashrei kol aretz yaseh mishpat," did he have a sense of justice? Like, I have a feeling of justice that he started with? Or is it basically what you're saying in terms of consistency? God taught him principles and said, if you apply this, this is justice. If you don't do this, that's injustice. So now, what Avram is doing, it's not because he has a sense of a feeling inside him of what's just or what's not just. It's he has rules that in terms of trying to develop this concept. God says, hey, God wants you to have this concept to apply. And it doesn't mean it's tied to any internal sense of emotions, you know. Okay, so that happens to be a really good question. The truth is it really ties into Ramban. The Ramban says Vasita Yasher V'Atov, which is in Dvarim, Perek Vav, Pasuk Yudchet 6:18. It says the Vasita Yasher V'Atov shall do what is proper. He says, basically, he says it's impossible for the Torah to give you every detail of what you are supposed to do correctly. So what the Torah has done is sort of said, we'll give you a few examples of doing the right thing, and then you are supposed to develop Hayashav Tov, which means go beyond the details that I'm saying to you and apply this idea of Yashra and Tov to many, many situations, to other situations. And this really gets into the issue over here. When according to the Ramban, it says Vasita Yashav V'Atov, and by the way, this Ramban is very simple to the Ramban, very similar to the Ramban Kedoshim Tiyu, right? Where the Ramban says you're supposed to be Kodesh. In other words, you develop some ideas, and then you're supposed to take this concept and apply it, like Kodesh Machal Mutalach. You're supposed to apply it and maintain this standard of Kedusha, even when it's permitted, which means that not everything is defined by by the details of the mitzvahs. You're supposed to go beyond the details of the mitzvahs, 12 concepts. The question is do those concepts connect to my emotions on the aspect, or am I just learning it? Okay, and it seems from Ramban and Asita Yashar Tov, it's possible to read Ramban. It says that from all the various mitzvot that you are to derive some kind of broad conceptualization of a yardstick that you're supposed to use beyond the details of halacha. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're supposed to have this emotional feeling of morality, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're supposed to have a certain feeling. You're supposed to come up with an idea. Okay, this is the broad concept that I'm supposed to follow, but it doesn't mean that that broad concept has anything to do with my own natural feelings of what's ethical and what's moral. And that's really it. There's no doubt that the Torah, based on Ramban, there's no doubt that the Torah has a very strong perception that you aren't supposed to keep to the details of halacha, but you are supposed to go beyond the details of halacha. Come up with concepts that you're supposed to apply beyond just the detail, just the first level details. The question is what do your feelings, what is your sense of what's moral, what role does that have in the development of those concepts? So you have a perception that is supposed to be a nice guy. So you see from the Torah, okay, this nice guy. The Torah is the Torah sort of telling you, hey, we are encouraging you to apply that emotion, let's say of chesed, and go beyond that and apply chesed in other cases? Or is it the Torah is basically telling you, I don't really care about your emotion at all. I care that you basically apply this standard, and I'm giving you certain factors for you to apply this standard, and then you should go beyond it to apply it in other cases.
As I'm listening to this, I'm thinking about my own past and what I see in my own kids. And on one hand, I was beginning to think that all of this concept of understanding and applying this internally is a cumulative process of experience, of life experience,
right,
that we develop that sort of intuition, that sixth sense of whether it's right or wrong. But when I look at my own development, I look at my kids, that children often have a very clear concept of, it's black and white, and teenagers are notorious for sort of pointing out and not being able to handle hypocrisy, right, that they see their parents behaving in one way and being told to behave in a different way, etc. Right. So it seems to suggest that there is something more innate that kids want, and the worst challenge for a child to face is probably favoritism, right, in terms of sibling rivalry, because then that shatters their worldview of how they view their parents, which is sort of a surrogate, right, to Hashem in terms of understanding the world. And
the fact is they expect that there be fairness, and fairness would not be built upon an aspect of favoritism. So the fact that one's favored over another would be challenged by, aren't you supposed to be fair? And it's that kind of feeling of aren't you supposed to be fair that's really the issue here. And the fact is that feeling really have a place within the Torah perspective. See, this is in general, but especially in our world today, there is somewhat of a concern that if you allow people to develop their own sense of morality or their own sense of what's right and what's wrong, it's a possibility that they will not abide by the Torah definitions, right? Like, there's an interesting statement from I saw this brought down by Rabbi Jacobowitz in his work on Jewish medical ethics, right? He was the first person to write a work on Jewish medical ethics. That was his big, Lord Jacobowitz was his big magnum opus. And in it, I remember reading that there's a statement the Gemara says, "Atov b'rofim leGehenim," right? The best doctors go to Gehenim. Okay. The way most people understand that is that Atov b'rofim leGehenim. The best doctors think that they're the ones who cure everyone. They become egotistical, and therefore the best doctors are so egotistical and so full of themselves, they go to Gehenna because they don't acknowledge the Kodesh Baruch Hu. They're constantly saying it's me. right? There's a movie actually that sort of played on that, where a doctor says, "I am God," so that kind of attitude. So that's the way most people understand Tov B'Rof Gehenim. He brings out another position. He says the Tov B'Rof Gehenim is the best doctors, the doctors who care the most. They go to Gehenim because they'll commit euthanasia. They have so much empathy towards their patients, right, that they'll feel so bad for a patient that they'll commit euthanasia, right, which means they'll commit murder, and which means they get Gehenna because they committed murder. It's a very fascinating statement because he's saying that on one level these people are motivated by what would be an ethical concern, right? They see someone in pain and they want to help out, and they feel the only answer is euthanasia. This person's going to die very soon and only live in pain. So they have this attitude. But it's still murder, al pi Torah. So therefore, it's the Gehenna. So the point is, according to that perspective, there's a possibility that if you develop this internal sense of what's right and what's wrong, it can lead to even challenges with the Torah, with Torah standards. The fact is that's why a lot of people don't want to play on developing those emotions. Want to stress the idea that what's halachically correct is basically from the Tzivei Hashem, and that we're not really interested in developing your inner feelings or not. We want you to look in the Shulchan Aruch to figure out what's right and what's wrong. We want you to follow that thing, and then that way, if you develop that, you don't become someone who has any conflicts. Question is that really the ideal? So it seems to be that the Ramban is basically saying if you don't develop any conceptualizations, then you won't be able to do lifnim b'shur sedel. So truth, you can't have these things contradict the halacha, but they're necessary in order to know how to go beyond the halacha. So therefore, he's saying you develop it. But the point is that do you develop it solely from the definitions of halacha, or do you have a perception of working with the emotions that people have? And that's really what it comes down to in that perception is how do you value what people feel in terms of their ethical standards. So the most classic statement on this issue is really the 6th parak of the Shmona Prakim of the Rambam, and I have copies there. Here, it's this over here, and hey, this is a translation. This is a Shmona Prakim with a translation by Rav Yaakov Feldman, who's done some excellent translations, and I think he's done Mesilas Yesharim. He's done Shari Tshuva. So he's written some very, very good translations. He's a personal friend, and I would say he's just come up with a work on the Shmona Prakim, and it seems to be very, very acceptable. I know that here it was in Toronto. It was pretty hard to get a copy. There was so much in demand. Anyways, so I just took the 6th paragraph because the Rambam says something very interesting in it. It says, okay, I'm just going to read through this here and point out, and hopefully we'll get to the 6th paragraph here. But you see from the Rambam's perspective where we're going is the Rambam seems to imply that there's some value to the emotions we have of ethics. Okay, so he says like this: Imru ha-philosophim she'akovesh et yisro v'af pisho ose ma'asim nelim har yu ose es atov bo b'zman shu shoyif l'ma'asim arayim v'shtokeg lahem navakim shifrotav v'nogel v'posav adma shem orin oto elav chotav tavatav t'chudatav. I'm sort of reading through this quickly, but maybe I should translate as we go along. He says the philosophers believed, maybe it's best for me just to work with this outside. He says the philosophers believed that there's 2 ways to do things. One way to do things is, I'm going to do this, I really want to do that, but I'm going to do this, right? So you're going to do the right action, but your structure of your own personality and your values are such that you would like to do that, okay? Then there's the other person who basically is the person who has the emotions only to do the right thing. It says, so the philosophers, the view from the philosophers, when the Rambam talks about the philosophers, he's talking from Aristotle, he says that you do good things, it's still a great thing you do good things, but if you're struggling, that you want to do not such good things, that's not too good to philosophers. But the greater level of philosophers, says over here, it says in the Hebrew, he says that person also you do the right things, but you're mitzvah over it. You're bothered by it. Okay, like it bothers you. Like I really want to do that bad thing, but I'm holding myself back and I'm not doing it. Says you still are on a good level, but it's not the best. But he says, okay, so he says, but the higher level to the philosophers is you really want to do what's good. Okay, so you don't have any internal conflict. Okay. He says, okay, and it seems to be from the philosophers that what you feel, the guy who feels who's a good guy, it's better than the guy who's struggling, does the right things, but really wants to do not so right things. Okay, but he says from Torah, that's okay, and he says, okay, so we have. Okay, so he says. Okay, so he says that in many ways, if you do things, you're doing the right things, you're equal to the chassid. But in many ways, he still has that desire to do something bad, right? Okay, even though he doesn't do it, he says it's still a bad thing to do. You shouldn't want to do bad things. Okay, and he brings sources here. Now he's going to bring sources that this is found in Torah as well. Brings Diber Shlomo Kagonze, okay, and he says things like that. He's bringing down a few sources from Torah that she says at the end of that line of that paragraph 101. Seems to be that Torah also says it's better to have these types of feelings. Okay. But he says, but if you start looking at when you start looking at Chazal, okay, Matzalehem Shashoev is over Everest, we're talking to him Yoshe Nala. You see in Chazal there's statements that say that the person who has a desire to do Averis but holds back is actually on a higher level. Okay, Ad Sha'amr, it says, Kol ma sheyeh adam yoter gadol v'shalom tiyah tavasal averot sesar sal bazivam yoter b'chamer. It says we have a statement that says anyone that's greater than his friend, his Yetzirah is greater than him. So it seems to say that the greater you become, the more your taiva will be there. So it seems to say that controlling yourself when you really want to do something else, that's good, right? So he says also, he brings down. He says, anyone who's greater is Yetzer is greater, and the famous statement in Pirkei Avos, Lefum Sara Agra, according to the challenge, according to the tsar, according to the difficulty in which you have to do. So it seems to be that there's something really on a high level of being someone who has opposite emotions, but you do the right thing, which means that having these emotions don't really matter. Okay, now. What's the Rambam going to do? So the Rambam is going to end up that, and then he's going to bring this famous Gemara from the famous Sifra. A person should not say, "I can't eat basar b'chalav; it's so disgusting to me. I don't want to eat basar b'chalav." I can't wear shatnez. I don't have any desire to have improper sexual relations. But it's very interesting. The Rambam does hold. Rambam is obviously going to lead to the category of chukim, and he does hold that sexual prohibition is the category of chukim. And efshi, I can clearly do it. I have no problems. Ma'aseh avi shemayim gazer alai. Kadosh Baruch Hu told me not to do it. That's the definition of morality. But me, I don't have any personal feelings from it. So it seems to be that what you have from this is a stira. Some places that you have sources that seem to imply, like the philosophers, it's great. You should be a certain type of person. And other things he says, you're supposed to be in conflict. So he says he's going to lead to the famous conclusion. He says there's two types of mitzvahs, right? Okay. He says one type of mitzvah is what is called mitzvah sichliot. Okay, and mitzvah sichliot are those prohibitions. He says like this. Kol Adam Shehem, he says, and this is what Heim Advarim HaMefursim Eitzel Kol Adam. Okay, in the middle of the paragraph on 103. Okay, Shur Rosh Heim Eitzel Plus Rosh Heim. Let's read that whole paragraph. Who shall Rosh Heim Eitzel Philosophim Rosh Heim? Those things which are negative to the philosophers, those are negative. Asher Bahem Amru. Shemi she'eno shoyef lehem yoter nala mina shoyef lehem. That someone who says that the person who is not interested in doing them is greater than a person who wants to do it but holds himself back. Heim hadvarim havusarim etzel kol adam shein roz kegon shrichus damim ugeneva. These are things that every human being considers bad, such as murder and theft, causing harming someone, it's fraud. You hurt someone who hasn't hurt you. Okay, and you return negative. You pay someone back improper, like your ingratitude is the way he translates this. Hazil Zabahorim, or someone who challenges his parents, guilt for him. Heima mitzvah shalem omrim hacham aleim hashalom dvarim shel malilo nichtavu ru'uyin hayin lichtav. The Katzvad says these are the things that Chazal says, these are the mitzvahs that if they weren't written, they weren't codified in Torah, they would have to be. Okay? And he says what's important. He says these are things that every human being has as a value. So he's basically saying that there's a category of mitzvot that meet a natural morality. And the natural morality, when it's something we have a natural morality of, we are supposed to feel that this is the ideal. And we're not just supposed to do it because the Torah tells us to do it, we're supposed to do it because we have that natural morality to do it. If we don't, we should work on it. Okay. This is what he says, okay, he says this is called mitzvah sichliot. He says, okay, and he says, "Ein safek she'nefesh rafet leizu mehen mishtaken law she nefesh balas migrot." Anyone who has this desire, I want to kill, I want to steal, that's bad. Those are emotions you're not supposed to have. You're supposed to have these certain moral perceptions. It's page 104, right? Person who is really good doesn't have any desire for these things. He doesn't feel bad. He doesn't have any sorrow from not doing them. But those things which the Torah says you're supposed to control, right, where you control your control, but it's better when you're controlling it. You should have that yetzer schar yotzer asum, and you have more schar if you're controlling him. Heim mitzvahs hashmiyas, and he translated it over here as authority-based mitzvot. Mitzvot have their strength from the fact that God said it, not because we have any personal moral perception of it. Their value is it's right because God said it's right. Zeh emes. If it wasn't for the Torah, we wouldn't look upon them as bad at all. Right? Therefore, it's important that the person in those categories, in those things, only has the Torah as saying not to do it. Not that he has any feeling for them whatsoever. Right? I think pork tastes really good. I'm sure it's really great to have pork. Why not take pork? Because God told me not to. That's it. No other reason. Okay. Now, this is the famous distinction the Rambam makes between mitzvah sichlius and chukim. So he says, he says, if you go back to the statement of, who was it, Rosh ben Gamliel, he says, Rosh ben Gamliel doesn't say, I can't eat, it's impossible for me to eat basar b'chalav, and discuss it by basar b'chalav. He says, but you don't have to say, Lo yomer adam, efshei laharek et nefesh. You don't have a person say, gee, it's impossible for me to kill someone. That's bad. Or efshei lignov, or it's impossible for me to steal, and that's bad. Efshei lekazev. FC Mas, okay, but I can't do that. But I'm possible to do it. But one of his Hisker with those type of things like stealing and murder and lying, in Yom Shakum okay, those things where you say, those things you're supposed to say, I can't do it. I have a moral sense that it's wrong, and I hold myself back from that. It says, but those things where you see these that you're supposed to say that you don't, you have a desire to do it, but you could do it, but you don't do it because God told you. Those are only on the authority-based mitzvot, such as Basar B'chalav and Shatnez and the Arayas. By the way, it's a very interesting thing. The Rambam constantly refers to the Arayas. Now this is, he's going to say, mitzvot elokiyot behenein shekorosam Hashem chukos chai. This is what Hashem says are the chukim, are the chokes. Okay, and all the arayas are, he seems to say all the arayas are in the chok category, which is a very interesting perspective, because usually in our world today we think of in the world you think of sexual morality as the greatest definition of morality for many years and things like that, but the fact is the Rambam puts in the category of hukim, which means it's in the category of kashrus and stuff like that. But the point is that he distinguishes these two types of mitzvahs. There's some types of mitzvahs which we only do because God tells us about them. And he says, and those type of mitzvahs, there's no reason for it. He's going to go into now that umas ha'olam mashivan aleim, ba'asatim mekayim aleim. On these type of mitzvahs, the umas ha'olam attack, and they attack them. Could go paraduma, like paraduma says, like, what is this? The crazy thing. I remember once there was a small show that was done, a small little film that was done in the 90s called What is a Jew? And it was man in the street interviews at Nathan Phillips Square, asking a bunch of people, what is a Jew? I think there were 2 Jews interviewed, mostly non-Jews. I remember seeing they had a bunch of teenage, maybe young 20s, non-Jewish girls, and saying, what is a Jew? And the woman said, this girl said, yeah, they have their own meat stores, don't they? Like, what weird people, they have their own meat stores. So it says those are things that people look at and say they're just crazy. It says, and those are the mitzvahs that are those are mitzvahs which are called hukim, and the world looks upon it as crazy, and we're supposed to say, listen, if it wasn't for God, we wouldn't do them, right? We wouldn't have any reason to do them, and I don't think there's anything wrong in doing those things. But the fact is I can't do it because God told me not to do it. Okay, but on the other type of mitzvah, the mitzvah sichliot, he says those are the things that you're supposed to have an emotion for. You're supposed to feel the morality. And the key point over here is how do you know the distinction between the mitzvah sichlios and the chukim? The Torah itself doesn't tell you. The Torah doesn't tell you this is a chuk, do it because God told you. This is a mitzvah sichlios. You should try and figure out the moral perception behind it. The way we know it's a mitzvah sichlios because it connects to the natural morality in humanity. Those mitzvot which connect to natural morality that the world has, and like you said before, the philosophers also think are wrong, and something they have a philosophical feeling for, those mitzvot are those that you're supposed to develop a sense of morality to. The mitzvot that you're supposed to look upon and say, hey, I can do it, I just don't do it because God told me not to. That the yardstick tells you that it's in that category is because the world doesn't do it. So therefore, what the Rambam is really applying here is the fact that natural morality tells us the distinction between these two types of mitzvot, which means natural morality actually plays a role in Torah. That mitzvot that seem to connect to natural morality, that seem to connect to our own sense of what's right and what's wrong, and where we feel it's right to do this, and therefore those are the mitzvot that you're supposed to develop a psyche that says it's right. You're supposed to follow through on that feeling of what's right. You're supposed to, in terms of the little cartoon, you're supposed to go with the angel and let the angel take over and defeat the little devil. But the point is that that's in those types of mitzvot. But in the mitzvahs, but in the chukim, how do you know it's a chuk? And it doesn't, and therefore the only reason you do it is because God tells you to do it, is because you have no sense of natural morality. You can tell it's from the world. The world, what's wrong with a cheeseburger? Right? So, okay, see, the world doesn't give its own cheeseburgers, so the only reason I don't eat cheeseburgers is because God tells me not to. But the world says it's wrong to steal. Oh, that tells me that the Torah laws that say don't steal, it's connected somehow to the idea that I'm supposed to develop an understanding of the morality underneath it, and I should bring it into my psychology and make me a certain type of person. And I know it's in that category because it ties to the natural morality around the world. And therefore I'm supposed to follow through on that natural morality. So that's a very interesting concept where the Rambam is making this idea. So now we're faced with the concept that the Rambam really is saying that there's a value to this natural morality. It has some type of role within Torah. The real difficulty is really determining really determining what happens if this natural morality changes. Like, for example, if you look in the chinuch, I'm just going to give this example because I think it's a very real example from our world today in terms of homosexuality, right? If you look in the chinuch, why is it that's natural? It's a double borrower. It's clear, everyone thinks it's wrong. It's pretty straightforward. So therefore, that would seem to be you're supposed to have a negative feeling towards this practice. On the other hand, right, the Rambam did say that the arise from the chukim. And the fact is that maybe you're supposed to sit there and say the only reason that homosexuality is usher is because Baruch Hu said it's usher. You're not supposed to have a emotion that says, "Oh, I think it's immoral" from a personal feeling. You're supposed to say, "Kodesh Baruch Hu said no. That's it." Same way as you feel toward Bar Michal. And you see that maybe history has changed, so that's something we have to deal with. But it seems from the Rambam clear that there's a value to that sense of morality in the world, and that somehow it has to be incorporated into Torah.